What if the most dangerous threat to an airliner wasn't a hijacker or a missile, but the very one paid to keep it safe? On a hot summer morning in Miami, American Airlines Flight 2834, a Boeing 737, was cleared for takeoff. On board, 150 passengers and crew were settling in for a routine flight. But as the pilots advanced the throttles, a critical error message flashed across their screens. The takeoff was immediately aborted. This was not a simple mechanical failure. What investigators would soon uncover was a deliberate act of sabotage that would expose a terrifying vulnerability at the heart of the entire aviation industry. For the 150 passengers of Flight 2834, the aborted takeoff was just another frustrating delay. After the Boeing 737 taxied back to the gate, they were simply moved to a replacement aircraft. But for the maintenance crew tasked with diagnosing the problem, the situation was about to escalate dramatically. You see, the error message pointed to a fault in the air data module system, a critical component that feeds the pilot's essential information about the plane's speed and altitude. When technicians opened the access panel in the aircraft's nose, they expected to find a faulty sensor or a loose connection. Instead, they found something that didn't belong. A small piece of dark, styrofoam-like material had been deliberately jammed into the module's sensitive workings, held firmly in place with superglue. This wasn't a malfunction, it was a crime scene. The investigation instantly shifted from a maintenance issue to a federal case. The question was no longer what had happened, but who had done it. This wasn't just some random act of vandalism. The saboteur had targeted a precise, sophisticated, and incredibly vital part of the aircraft. This was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and understood the catastrophic potential of their actions. The discovery sent a shockwave through the airline and federal law enforcement. The enemy wasn't at the gates, they were already inside. But now a new, more terrifying clock was ticking. Had this person tampered with other aircraft? How do you find a saboteur who operates in plain sight, a criminal whose authorized presence is the perfect cover? This is the fundamental nightmare of the insider threat. The FBI's elite Joint Terrorism Task Force was called in to lead the manhunt. The physical evidence was minimal, a piece of foam and some glue, but the potential for catastrophe was immense. Investigators turned to the airport's most powerful tool, its sprawling network of surveillance cameras. They painstakingly began to review hours upon hours of footage, searching for any unusual activity around the aircraft before its scheduled departure. It was like looking for a single ghost in a city of thousands, and then they found it. The video captured a maintenance vehicle pulling up to the plane. A figure got out and spent approximately 7 minutes working near the forward electronics bay where the sabotaged system was housed. The person's face was obscured, but they had one identifying feature that stood out on the grainy footage: a noticeable limp. This was the break they needed. Investigators showed the footage to other American Airlines mechanics, hoping someone would recognize the person's gait or their vehicle. The recognition was immediate and chilling. The saboteur wasn't an outside agent who had breached security. He was one of their own, Abdul Majid Maruf Ahmed Alani. The thing that nobody tells you is that the most effective security systems in the world, the fences, the badges, the guards, are all designed to keep the wrong people out. They do very little to stop the wrong person who is already in. Alani was that person. He had the keys to the kingdom, and he had just used them to try and bring it down. When the FBI confronted Alani, he didn't deny it, but the motive he gave was almost too bizarre to believe. He claimed his goal wasn't to harm anyone. It was, he insisted, about money. At the time of the incident, American Airlines and its mechanics union were locked in a bitter and protracted contract negotiation. The airline had even accused mechanics of an illegal work slowdown that had caused hundreds of flight cancellations. Alani told investigators that he was financially strapped and frustrated by the stalled talks. His plan, he claimed, was simple and cynical: tamper with the aircraft to cause a delay or cancellation, then get paid overtime to help perform the repair. It was a story of a labor dispute spiraling dangerously out of control. In a strange fulfillment of his own plot, he had, in fact, worked overtime to help fix the very system he had disabled. This narrative framed him as a disgruntled but not homicidal employee, a man whose desperation had led him to an act of incredible recklessness. It was a tidy explanation, but as prosecutors dug deeper into Alani's life, they uncovered a second, far more sinister narrative hidden on his personal cell phone that would transform the case entirely. The story of a simple financial grievance shattered during Alani's bail hearing. In a dramatic courtroom revelation, federal prosecutors presented evidence suggesting he harbored terrorist sympathies. They told the judge that investigators had found ISIS propaganda videos on his phone, including one showing a graphic execution that he had shared with another person. They also discovered a text message he had sent in Arabic, asking God to use divine powers to harm non-Muslims. The prosecution further alleged that he had a brother in Iraq who was a member of the ISIS extremist group. Suddenly, the defendant was no longer just a disgruntled mechanic. He was a potential national security threat. The facade of a simple overtime scheme had crumbled, but the most damning evidence came from Alani himself. Under questioning from a federal prosecutor, he was asked a simple, hypothetical question. Would he have allowed his own family to fly on the plane he had sabotaged? His answer was a chilling and unequivocal no. That single word stripped away any pretense of benign intent. It was a direct admission that he knew he had created a lethal situation. This raises an intriguing question. What exactly did he do to the plane that made him so certain it was a death trap? Alani's weapon of choice wasn't a bomb or a gun, it was a crude piece of styrofoam. His method was simple, but his target was sophisticated and exceptionally critical. He attacked the Air Data Module, or ADM, a core component of the Boeing 737's digital nervous system. To understand the danger, you have to understand what this little box does. The ADM acts as a transducer, a vital link between the physical world and the plane's computers. It takes raw air pressure readings from the pitot tubes on the outside of the aircraft and translates them into the digital data for airspeed, altitude, and vertical speed. This stream of data is the lifeblood of a modern cockpit. It feeds the pilot's primary flight displays, giving them their fundamental understanding of the plane's state. It also feeds the autopilot and auto-throttle, the automated systems that fly the aircraft with computer precision. By jamming the ADM with foam, Alani was attempting to poison this well of information. He was feeding corrupted data into the very heart of the systems that keep the aircraft stable and on course. The plane's own redundant logic was robust enough to catch the error while it was still on the ground, triggering the warning that forced the pilots to abort the takeoff. But what would have happened if it had become airborne? According to an American Airlines pilot involved in the investigation, the answer was clear. A crash could have resulted. Had Flight 2834 taken off, the consequences could have been catastrophic. In the air, erroneous data fed to the autopilot and auto-throttle could have commanded the plane to do dangerous things, pitching up into a stall or down into a high-speed dive, all while the pilot struggled to understand what was happening. The greatest danger is pilot disorientation. In conditions of poor visibility, flying at night or through clouds, pilots are completely reliant on their instruments. If those instruments are lying, telling them they are flying level when they are in a steep bank or that their speed is safe when they are about to stall, the crew can quickly lose control. This exact type of scenario, a loss of reliable airspeed data leading to pilot confusion and a subsequent crash, was a primary factor in the tragic loss of Air France Flight 447 over the Atlantic Ocean. Alani's simple act of sabotage was designed to create the perfect conditions for a similar disaster. He was turning the aircraft's own complexity and automation against itself. But while the technical plot was chilling, the official story left many with a deep sense of unease. The court case settled on two dueling narratives, a greedy mechanic looking for overtime or a radicalized extremist acting alone. But many people are crazy about conspiracies, and for a case this strange, the theories began to run wild. The thing is, when an event is this bizarre, it's human nature future to wonder if there's more to the story. What if the truth is even stranger than what we were told? One of the most persistent theories is that the overtime plot was a story of convenience. It was a simple, understandable motive that allowed the justice system to close the case cleanly without opening a much larger, more complicated can of worms. Some speculate that Alani could have been a pawn in a larger intelligence operation, perhaps coerced or manipulated by others. Was he acting under duress? This theory lacks hard evidence, but it speaks to the public's difficulty in believing such a reckless act could stem from something as mundane as a labor dispute. Another chilling possibility that counter-terrorism experts sometimes consider is the idea of a probe attack. In this scenario, a smaller, non-catastrophic act of sabotage is carried out simply to test a system's defenses. The goal isn't to cause mass casualties this time, but to gather data. How long does it take for the tampering to be discovered? What is the investigative response? Who gets called in? By triggering the system and observing the reaction, a more sophisticated adversary could plan a much larger, more coordinated future attack. Was Alani's clumsy attempt a dry run? It seems far-fetched, but it's a terrifying thought. The fact that he was so easily caught could even be part of the test to see what level of incompetence would still be detected. These speculative ideas highlight the deep unease the Alani case created. While the official investigation focused on the man himself, these what-ifs point to a different fear, the fear of the unknown and the possibility that this event, as disturbing as it was, might only be a small part of a much larger, unseen picture. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Alani case is not what he did, but that he was in a position to do it at all. He was not a ghost who slipped through the cracks. He was a classic known wolf, an employee whose history was littered with red flags that were either missed or ignored. Years before the sabotage incident, Alani had been fired from another carrier, Alaska Airlines, for a series of serious maintenance mistakes. The Federal Aviation Administration, the industry's top regulator, had even suspended his mechanic's license for a month as a result, and yet he was able to maintain his position in a critical, safety-sensitive role at American Airlines. This pointed to a profound systemic failure, a lack of information sharing between airlines that allowed a high-risk individual to simply move from one carrier to another without his troubled history following him. The incident served as a brutal validation of warnings from government watchdogs. A report from the US Government Accountability Office, published just a month before Alani's sentencing, had identified significant weaknesses in the Transportation Security Administration's insider threat program, explicitly citing his case as a prime example of the ongoing danger. Facing a federal charge of willfully damaging an aircraft, Alani was looking at a maximum of 20 years in prison. He initially pleaded not guilty, but held without bond, and facing the specter of the terrorism allegations, his position was untenable. In December 2019, he changed his plea to guilty. In March 2020, the sentence was handed down, 37 months in prison. To many, a sentence of just over 3 years felt shockingly lenient for a man who had deliberately endangered 150 lives. The legal case was officially closed, but Alani's betrayal left a stark reminder that the most sophisticated fences and security checkpoints are meaningless if the threat is already on the inside. Was his 37-month sentence a fair punishment for a crime that could have been a massacre? Let us know in the comments. Smash that subscribe button and dive into our next insane video.